That spring, up on what folks still called the old Tackett place, everything was ordinary as any other farm in this holler. Corn coming in, fence mended, a young family settling into land that had passed through more hands than most, and a line of trees running the back property divide, same as it had run for longer than anybody living could rightly say. Wasn't nothing wrong with that spring, not to look at it. The only thing anybody marked, and didn't think twice on, was how the man who'd bought that place, feller name of Emmett Salyer, took a particular pride in not believing what the old families always believed about that tree line. Said it plain, more than once. And when one of them trees took sick and died, Emmett didn't replant it. Left the gap standing open, right where every owner before him had always filled it in quick. I know how that decision turned out, young'un, on account of my own daddy was one of the two men called in weeks later to fix what Emmett Salyer had let come undone. It's about the only account of his own life my daddy ever give me, just the once whole life through, and I aim to give it to you the same careful way he give it to me. Tonight, I want you to feel it the way he did, not all at once, but slow, night by night, the way a thing gets worse when nobody's watching close enough to notice till it's already bad. Before I get on into it, for them just settling in, name's Elias. Pawpaw Elias, if you're kindly. I'm out here 2 nights a week, Saturdays and Sundays, and if this porch is one you mean to keep coming back to, I'd take it as a kindness if you'd subscribe. Hit that like button too, if it's earned it, so more folks find their way here. Now, let me tell you about the old Tackett place and the line of trees that ran its back divide. Folks in this holler still called it the Tackett place, even by the time Emmett Salyer bought it, on account of the Tacketts had held that land the longest anybody could recollect. 3 generations of 'em. Family never was quite the same, though, after they lost a boy of theirs, name of Amos, to the mines back in 1922, went in a shift and never come back out. And the company's paperwork on it never did add up right, if you know that account. Wasn't but 20 years on from that when the last of the Tacketts finally sold out and moved off west somewhere, tired of a home place that kept the memory of him too close. Wasn't unusual, that land changing hands. What was unusual, if you asked around, was how every family that ever held it, Tacketts included, and whoever held it before them, kept up the same particular habit, without fail. A line of trees running the back property divide, where the cleared bottom land give way to the start of the timber, got tended close as a garden. Any tree in that line took sick or blew down in a storm, it got replaced. Same spot, same kind of tree, near as the old-timers could manage. Nobody let a gap set in that line longer than it took to get a new sapling in the ground. Emmett Salyer come into that land in the spring of 1942, a young man hisself, with a young wife, Alma, and a boy not yet school age, name of Dewey. Bought it fair, worked it hard, and by every account was a decent enough neighbor, helped raise a barn 2 farms over that first summer, brought Alma's canning to the church suppers, same as anybody. But Emmett had come up from a county where folks didn't put much stock in old mountain ways, and he made no secret, once he heard the story of that tree line from a neighbor trying to be helpful, that he thought it was foolishness, superstition dressed up as farming sense. He said as much more than once, standing right there at the general store, loud enough for it to get repeated. Said a man who let a line of trees tell him how to run his own land wasn't much of an owner at all. The old folks who heard him say it didn't argue back, just went quiet the way mountain people do when they've decided a thing ain't worth the breath of explaining, and let Emmett Salyer believe whatever he wanted to believe. Now, the man everybody in that holler pointed to, you needed serious work done and wanted it done honest, was my own grandfather, Ezra Combs. Wasn't but a young miner hisself in them years, still finding his way, but even then folks trusted him, trusted his word, trusted his hands. Emmett never did call on him that first spring, didn't see the need. That was the way of things at the old Tackett place. That first year, Emmett Salyer held it. Ordinary. Even a little proud of itself in Emmett's case. The line of trees stood full and unbroken, same as it always had, same as it always would, right up until the first one of 'em took sick. Late that summer, one of the older trees in that line, a big one near the middle of the divide, took some kind of blight. Leaves went yellow, then brown inside of a couple weeks, and by the time the first frost come, it was dead through, bark peeling off in sheets. Ordinary enough thing. Trees die. Emmett cut it down hisself that fall, cleared the stump, and left it be. Didn't plant nothing in its place. Told Alma, when she asked, that he wasn't in the habit of throwing good money and good labor at a superstition, and that gap in the line could set there empty long as it pleased him. For a week or two wasn't a thing to remark on, just a gap in a tree line, same as any farm's got somewhere. Then the cattle started acting peculiar. Emmett kept a small herd, nothing grand, and they'd always graze that whole back pasture easy, right up near the tree line, same as anywhere else. But within a couple weeks of that tree coming down, them cattle quit going anywhere close to that gap. Didn't matter how good the grass grew there, and it grew good. With the tree's shade gone, the herd would graze right up to a certain distance and no closer, then work their way around, same as if there was a fence there nobody could see. Of an evening especially, they'd bunch up tight on the far side of the pasture, facing away from that gap, restless in a way Emmett's hired boy remarked on more than once. Emmett noticed it. Course he did. But cattle spook at all manner of nothing. A strange smell on the wind, a shift in weather coming, a fox denned up too close. He told himself that's all it was, and told Alma the same when she brought it up at supper, a little more serious than he cared for. Said he wasn't about to go planting a tree on account of some skittish cows. And for near on a month after that, nothing more come of it. The cattle kept their distance from that gap, evenings especially, but they ate well enough elsewhere, and calved fine come spring, and Emmett stopped paying the matter any mind at all. Fall turned to winter proper, the ground hardened, and farm life settled into its ordinary rhythms, hog-killing time, the wood-box kept full, Sunday meeting same as always. Emmett took to mentioning the whole business at the store now and again, not near as loud as before, but satisfied sounding, like a man who'd tested something and come out the other side proved right. Told a few of the old-timers friendly enough that he reckoned that tree line was just a habit gone stiff with age, nothing more, and no harm had come of leaving it be. The old-timers didn't say much back. One of 'em, story has it, just asked Emmett had he counted how many weeks it had been. Emmett hadn't and didn't see why he ought to. Now, I'll tell you, young'un, if you set that quiet spell up against everything that come after, it reads different than it did to Emmett Salyer, living through it. To him, it was proof. To me, hearing it secondhand, decades removed, it reads like the kind of quiet that comes right before something, the kind old folks always said not to trust. But Emmett didn't know to be careful of a quiet spell. Wasn't his upbringing that taught him to wonder on it. So the winter passed easy enough. The gap in that tree line stood open the whole while, same as Emmett had left it, snow settling into it, same as anywhere else on the property. And when spring come again, and the ground thawed, and it come time to think about planting the year's crop, Emmett Salyer had near about forgot there'd ever been a tree there at all. Till one morning in early April, Emmett went out to check the back pasture, same as he did most every morning, and found near 40 foot of that fence line torn clean out of the ground. Not knocked down, not leaning from weather. Torn, posts pulled up whole, wire snapped in places and stretched loose in others, and every bit of the damage centered right on that gap where the dead tree used to stand, spreading out a good 20 foot either direction from it. Cattle was scattered clear across 2 pastures by the time Emmett found 'em, spooked bad enough that a couple had run themselves lathered, and one had gone lame catching a leg in a gopher hole in the dark. Emmett walked that whole stretch of torn fence 3 times over, he told Ezra later, looking for what could have done it. Storm hadn't come through. The sky had been clear all night. Alma could vouch for that. She'd been up with Dewey, who took sick with a fever that same evening and wouldn't settle. No downed limbs, nothing from a fallen tree. No tracks he could make sense of, not from cattle busting through. The wire was pulled the wrong direction for that, snapped from the inside out toward the timber like something had wanted through and hadn't cared to be neat about it. But nothing pushing from the pasture side toward the woods, the way you'd expect if it was his own herd that done the damage trying to get away from something behind them. Alma didn't say much when Emmett come in that morning, gray in the face, telling her about it, just looked at him a long moment and asked when he aimed to plant that tree. Emmett didn't answer her direct, but that was the day, young'un, the very same day, forenoon, that he saddled a horse and rode into town looking to find out where a man might locate Ezra Combs and ask him, would he take on a job? Let me stop you right there a second, young'un, 'cause that's the point where my own family's part in this account begins, and I want you settled in before I get to it. I'm always curious where this porch reaches of an evening, so if you'll do me a kindness, drop me a comment and tell me what town or county you're listening from tonight. And if your own family's ever kept up some old custom on a piece of land, a line to mow, a corner never plowed, something passed down without much explaining, I'd be obliged to hear about that too. Now, let me tell you about the 2 men Emmett Salyer went and found. Ezra Combs took the job and brought his own boy along to help with the digging and the hauling. My daddy, Silas, wasn't but 20 years old that spring, strong-backed and glad of the wages, and thought nothing more of it at first than any other day's labor. Ezra had a name for straight dealing in that holler, and part of that reputation, Silas told me, come from the fact that Ezra never took a job he thought was foolish. If Ezra Combs agreed there was real work needed on that fence and that gap, other folks took it serious too, whether they said so out loud or not. They started the first morning fixing what fence they could and set to digging the hole for a new sapling right where the old tree had stood. Ground was harder than either of 'em expected that deep in, near like something had packed it down tight over the winter, and it took the better part of that whole first day just to get the hole dug proper and the new tree set and staked. That first night passed quiet enough. No fence torn, no cattle scattered. Silas told me, looking back, it felt almost like the whole business had settled itself the moment that one sapling went in the ground. But it wasn't near the same kind of quiet as that first breather Emmett had enjoyed the winter before. Little Dewey, still not fully over whatever fever had took him the night of the torn fence, woke twice crying, unable to say what had scared him, only that he didn't want to look at his window. Alma didn't sleep neither, by her own account, keeping watch near the boy's room half the night, and Silas himself, bunking in the barn loft those weeks to save the ride back and forth, told me he woke twice with his heart going hard, certain sure he'd heard something outside and found nothing there both times but the ordinary dark. Ezra didn't say much about it the next morning, only that they'd best not dawdle finishing the rest of that line, seeing as one tree wasn't the whole of what needed replacing, told Silas plain. The gap the dead tree left had been bigger than the one tree could rightly fill on account of two saplings either side of it had died back some over the winter too, without Emmett ever noticing or caring to mention it. Now, like I told you at the start of this account, my daddy Silas didn't talk much about his own life, and this here's the only time in all my years knowing him that he ever spoke on this particular job. Come out of him sudden, unprompted, the two of us standing at a stranger's fence line that had nothing to do with the Salyer place at all, just happened to have a similar row of trees running its divide. He went quiet a second, looking at it, and then he just started talking, like something in him had been waiting on the right prompt for 50 years. I'll give it to you the way he give it to me. He said, "Wasn't the fence that got to me, son. Wasn't even the boys crying, though that was hard enough to hear. It was your grandpa's face." He said, "Ezra Combs did not rattle. Not for nothing. Man went down in that mine more times than I could count and come up steady every time. Even the year of the bad slide, even burying his own kin. But I watched him. Second night, we worked that line. Stop digging all sudden, straighten up, and just stand there listening to something I couldn't hear at all. And his face, I ain't got the words for it right even now. Wasn't fear exactly. More like a man remembering something he'd been told as a boy and hadn't let himself believe was true till that exact moment. He said, I asked him what he heard. He didn't answer me for a long moment. Then he just said, "Dig faster, Silas." And we did. That's near about the whole of what my daddy ever told me on the subject, young'un. He didn't dress it up, didn't make a story of it, the way I know I've made a story of telling it to you tonight. Just them few sentences, flat and plain, and then he changed the subject and never did bring it up again, not one time, in all the years after. Third night of the work, with 2 of the 3 gaps in that line filled and the last one still bare, was the night Silas said everything changed for good. They'd worked past dark again, trying to get ahead of it, Emmett out there with a lantern helping where he could. Though truth told, he wasn't much use with a shovel and knew it. Alma had put Dewey to bed early, wore out from 2 nights of bad sleep, and set to watching from the porch, same as she had the nights before. It was Alma who screamed first. Silas told me he never did get the full clear picture of it, working as it happened, but the pieces come together after. Dewey had woke, and instead of crying out for his mama, same as the other nights, he got up out of bed entire, quiet as anything, walked clean through the house and out the front door, and was halfway across the yard, barefoot in the cold, walking steady and purposeful, toward that last open gap in the tree line. Before Alma even realized his bed was empty, she caught him not 30 foot from the men still working, not more than 60 foot from the gap itself. Silas said the boy wasn't struggling, wasn't fighting her, just kept trying, calm as anything, to keep walking forward, like a young'un reaching for something he wanted and couldn't understand why his mama wouldn't let him have it. Eyes open the whole time, Silas said. Never once looked like he was sleepwalking, the way you'd picture it. Looked, if anything, like he was headed somewhere he'd been called to. Ezra dropped his shovel and covered the last few feet of that gap himself, standing square in it, facing the dark timber beyond, while Silas helped Emmett get Alma and the boy back into the house. Wasn't a soul on that property after that night, still arguing about whether the job needed finishing. Only question left was whether they'd get it finished in time. They worked through what was left of that night and clean into the next day, Ezra refusing to stop for more than water and a bite of cornbread. Silas keeping pace best he could beside him, digging that last hole proper, deep enough and wide enough to set a young tree right, in ground that fought 'em every inch of the way. Silas said it felt, by the end, less like planting something and more like closing something up. Emmett rode 2 counties over that same day to find a sapling of the right kind, big enough to matter, and come back near dusk with it wrapped in wet sacking across his saddle. By the time he got back, Ezra and Silas had the hole ready and waiting, and the 3 of 'em set to planting it together in the last gray light, working faster as true dark come on, none of 'em saying much, all of 'em feeling, Silas said, like they were racing something without knowing exactly what the race was. Alma stood on the porch the whole while, Dewey held tight against her, the boy quiet now, watching same as his mama. They got that tree set and the dirt tamped down firm around its roots right around the hour before midnight. And Silas told me this the one piece of it he'd repeat on the rare chance the subject ever come close to coming up again in later years, though he'd never give the rest of it, that in the moment Ezra pressed that last bit of soil down with his boot heel, sealing the gap complete after near a week of it standing open, the whole night around 'em went still in a way he'd never felt before nor since. Not quiet, exactly. Still, like something large had been holding its breath and had just all at once let it go and turned away. Ezra straightened up, looked down the length of that tree line, now whole again for the first time in the better part of a year, and said only, to no one in particular, "That's got it now." He never did explain to Silas what it was, only told him, walking back toward the house that night, that the old families who'd first set that line of trees generations back had understood something about that particular strip of ground that got lost mostly. Once families stopped staying put long enough to pass it on proper, something about a boundary that mattered for reasons beyond just whose name was on the deed. Ezra didn't claim to know the whole of it himself. Said his own daddy had only told him the same way, in pieces, never the full account. But he said a body didn't need the whole of a thing to know it was real sometimes, just needed to have stood close enough to it once. Emmett Salyer never did question that line of trees again, long as he owned that land. Paid Ezra and Silas full and fair for the work, and more besides, though neither one of 'em ever spoke on why the extra money seemed owed. From that spring on, Emmett kept that tree line as close and careful as any old family ever had. Closer, maybe, on account of he'd learned the hard way what the old families had just always known. But owning that land didn't turn out to be for long. Alma never did feel easy in that house again, Silas told me, not after that third night, and within 3 years the Salyers sold up and moved off to be nearer her people. Same as more than one family had done on that particular piece of ground long before Emmett ever bought it, and long after, too, far as I've ever heard. The old Tackett place kept right on changing hands, generation to generation, same as it always had. Nobody staying put too long, and every single owner, whatever else they believed or didn't, keeping that line of trees whole. Dewey Salyer grew up same as any boy, far as Silas ever heard tell, moved off with his family and made his own life somewhere else entire. Whether he remembered anything of that night, walking barefoot across a cold yard toward a gap in a tree line, Silas never did know and never had cause to ask. And my grandfather Ezra never took on that kind of work again, not fence work, not land work of any sort past his own place. Went back to the mine and stayed there the rest of his working years, and if anybody asked him why he'd give up day labor that paid better and hurt his back less, he'd just say mining suited him fine, and leave it there. Now, before I let you go tonight, I want to ask you something serious. If you'd been Emmett Salyer, young and sure of yourself, would you have left that gap open long as he did? Or would pride have given out sooner, before it ever come to calling for help in the dark? Tell me down in the comments which one you'd have been. If this porch is one you mean to keep coming back to, I'd be obliged if you'd subscribe Saturdays and Sundays, same as always, with another one waiting on you. Next time, I got an account about a granny woman called out to a berth in a cabin that, by all rights, shouldn't have had a soul living in it no more. For tonight, though, that line of trees is still standing, far as I know, on land that's changed hands more times since than anybody in this holler could rightly count. And there's still folks keeping it whole without knowing why. Same as my grandfather Ezra never did tell my daddy the whole of it, and my daddy sure never told me. I've thought a good deal over the years on why that was the only account my daddy ever give me of his own life. Man worked that mine near 40 years, buried friends, raised a family, seen more hardship than most, and out of all of it, this was the one thing that ever come loose from him, and only the once, and only because a strange fence line happened to jog it free. I asked him that same evening why he'd never told it before. He thought on that a while before he answered. Said he reckoned some things a man carries don't get lighter for the telling. Said he'd rather carry it quiet than hand the weight of it to somebody else before he had to. I've gone on and told it to you anyway, young'un. I hope that don't make a liar of him. I told it 'cause I reckon a thing like this, kept whole and quiet in one family for near 80 years, is worth more passed on careful than lost complete. That line of trees is still out there somewhere, holding its ground the same as it always has. I expect it always will.